Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin today with State Superintendent Sydney Dixon. She's here with the very latest information on going back to school. Superintendent, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for giving us your time today.
Thanks for having me, Glenn.
Very important conversation. Parents are trying to figure out what's going on as the first day of school approaches. So let's first start off by talking about the strategy of going district by district and allowing each district to come up with their own game plan. Why is that the appropriate way forward in your mind?
Learned a lot from soft closure in the spring, and we used a one-size-fits-all approach to just closing down and everybody leaning in. Well, we believe it was a good preventative measure and the right thing to do. It exacerbated this idea of local context matters. So creating a framework that has requirements in it plus recommendation allows for each school and each district to look at their context and determine based on how the virus is behaving and what the needs are of their community. They can develop a plan that works for their families and their students.
What about in a situation, though, where just because you live on one side of the street potentially or the other, your plan could be different than those who live in the next neighborhood over?
Right. In the case of districts, of course, they're within many of the county boundaries. So I don't know that we'll have such a variance there. Charter by charter, of course, our charter schools have students from all over the valley or wherever they live. And so that's a little bit different situation. But in terms of equity, that is a fundamental principle that everybody has to think about and look at. So you might have remote learning that's the bulk of a plan in one district or charter, but if you don't have all the elements in place of broadband in every home, teachers who are able to teach online, or a blended model or face-to-face where it's appropriate, you have to think of every situation in every family and take those into account to serve them appropriately.
What are you anticipating most? Are you anticipating mostly in person, mostly online, or a hybrid of the two in most scenarios?
Well, we know what the virus is and a little bit how it behaves, but until we all behave as a state and try to slow or stop the virus from spreading, we really won't know until we get closer. But our schools and our districts have been planning in a very nimble way. They've looked at several different models, as you've mentioned. As we get closer, if we can't see that the virus, I think a lot of our district charters will go into a remote modality. So I think most are trying to plan for a blended model so that families, teachers, and students have choice.
In districts that do go forward with the in-person model, do you anticipate most families will opt in for that? Or do you think there will be some fear of going back in and families saying, no, I'd rather go the online route?
I think every district and probably most, if not all of our charters, have surveyed families. And it depends on the county. If you have a county where people feel safe and there hasn't been a lot of spread, you're going to see a higher agreement of coming in person to person or a blended model. So it really depends. I don't know that we have that data yet. We'll see as we get closer the comfort level of families depending on the model that a district or charter chooses to use.
But that will be an option for families who do not want to send their kids back to school. Regardless of the district, they can go the online route?
Correct, because we do have online opportunities throughout our state. We already have online schools that are part of districts and charters that are fully online. So even if a district doesn't offer that opportunity, there are online opportunities all throughout the state.
For teachers who are concerned about returning to the classroom, are you confident there will be options for them to do so if that's what they see fit?
I'm glad you asked that question because it's really important that the adults in our system, the teachers who are on the front line, feel safe and comfortable in going back to school as well. So if a district or a charter is going back in a face-to-face or a blended model, I know that some are working hard to make accommodations for their teachers and trying to match classes with teachers in an online setting for families who want to stay online and teachers who need to teach online. It's a little more challenging for some of our remote and rural areas, but in larger districts, that's probably an easier task. And I know everybody's talking about that and working on it.
And we all know our teachers work really hard as it is. I've heard some raise concerns about having to prepare for these different scenarios, maybe teaching in person, maybe online, maybe the hybrid of or the mix. Are you concerned at all that we're going to overburden our teachers with this plan?
Another great question, and so thanks for thinking about our teachers. A wise plan is one that takes into account how teachers can make sure that they're not teaching in 3 different ways, but really using scenarios where, for example, they load their content onto Canvas, or they're using one platform so that it makes it easier for families, where people are sharing loads where a teacher might teach online and another teacher might teach in person. So really thinking about ways that we mitigate teachers feeling like they have to teach in 3 different ways. We're seeing some models with cameras in classrooms, so students can be at home and be a part of the classroom. We're seeing some where a full course is put online, so students might take a couple of courses online.
We've seen districts kind of take different approaches to the mask mandate. What would you like to see? Should students be wearing masks when they return to school?
Well, we know 3 things about trying to mitigate the spread, and that is distancing, masks, and hygiene, washing of hands. And all 3 of those are really important in our schools as well. So masks is part of that equation. We're not saying that every student all day long will never be able to take their mask off, because there will be times when they can be outside and distanced, or maybe a few kids in an auditorium in distance, or there are a variety of ways and places, certainly eating and drinking. But we also have to think about the other factors, and that's movement in hallways and entry and exit into school, wherever there are tight spaces and groups of students where they're moving from one class to another. Those are times of hallways, and in classrooms if they're going to be in close proximity, and even more than 15 minutes at a time. So masks are one way to mitigate some of those characteristics of the virus and keeping it from spreading. Of course, risk is always there, but masks are a really important way to mitigate it.
All right, State Superintendent Sydney Dixon, we sure appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Glenn.